You're invisible, not because you're weak, not because you lack intelligence, discipline, or potential, but because you've spent too much of your life making yourself emotionally available to people who only value what they fear losing. Too eager to explain yourself, too quick to react, too willing to sacrifice your peace just to feel accepted. And the harsh truth is this: the more desperately a person seeks validation, the less respect they receive in return. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. A mind that depends on external approval can never truly be free, because once someone gains control over your emotions, they begin influencing your decisions, your confidence, and eventually your sense of self. Real power has never belonged to the loudest person in the room. It belongs to the person who remains calm when others become emotional, the person who can walk away without bitterness, the person who no longer feels the need to prove their worth in every conversation, every interaction, every moment of silence. That kind of presence cannot be performed for long because it is built quietly through restraint, self-respect, and emotional discipline. And once that shift begins internally, people feel it immediately. The energy changes, the way you speak changes, the way people respond to you changes. Because the world treats people differently when they stop abandoning themselves for approval. There is a reason calm people leave such a lasting impression. Their presence feels grounded, certain. They are not constantly negotiating their value through attention or reassurance. While others react impulsively to every opinion, rejection, or moment of uncertainty, they remain centered within themselves. And in a world addicted to noise, emotional urgency, and endless validation, that kind of self-possession becomes impossible to ignore. There is a quiet cost to constantly needing to be understood. Most people do not notice it at first because it disguises itself as kindness, patience, and emotional openness. You explain yourself a little more. You try harder to show your intentions. You replay conversations in your mind, searching for the perfect words that would finally make someone recognize your loyalty, your effort, or your sincerity. But something begins changing in the process. The more energy you spend trying to secure approval, the more uncertain your presence becomes. People sense it immediately, even if they cannot explain why. Desperation has a texture to it. It appears in over-explaining, constant availability, and the inability to remain still when validation disappears. And even though people claim they value honesty and openness above all else, they are naturally drawn toward those who seem emotionally grounded within themselves. That is why calm individuals leave such a strong impression. Their presence feels stable. They are not rushing to convince anyone of their worth because they are not internally negotiating it every moment of the day. There is a difference between expressing yourself honestly and constantly defending your existence to the world around you. One comes from clarity, the other comes from fear. Stoic philosophy understood this deeply. The moment your confidence begins rising and falling with the opinions of others, your emotional state no longer belongs to you. It becomes controlled by praise, rejection, attention, and approval. That kind of dependence weakens a person quietly from the inside because it trains the mind to search outward for stability instead of building it internally. Many people spend years exhausting themselves emotionally without understanding why they feel invisible. They believe the answer is to give more, explain more, and prove more. Yet every attempt only increases the feeling of being overlooked. People rarely respect what is constantly trying to earn permission to be valued. There is no weight in it, no certainty. Human beings trust emotional steadiness because steadiness signals self-control. The person who remains composed during uncertainty appears stronger than the person who constantly reacts to it. This has nothing to do with pretending not to care. It has everything to do with refusing to let every external situation dictate your internal state. Once that discipline begins developing, interactions start changing in subtle ways. Conversations feel different, silence feels different, Even conflict changes because you stop entering every situation with the hidden need to be reassured. A delayed response creates anxiety immediately for someone emotionally dependent on approval. A disagreement creates the urge to over-explain. A moment of distance creates panic. Most people never realize how much of their behavior is driven by fear of disapproval. They believe they are protecting relationships when in reality they are abandoning themselves to maintain them. The Stoics warned against this kind of dependence because it places your peace in the hands of unstable people and unpredictable circumstances. Real stability begins when your emotional center stops moving according to the moods of others. That kind of stability cannot be faked for long. People eventually notice the difference between forced confidence and genuine self-possession. Calmness creates psychological weight. Others instinctively sense when a person is not easily shaken. This is why emotional discipline often appears more powerful than charisma. Charisma attracts attention quickly, but emotional steadiness creates trust over time. There is something deeply reassuring about someone who does not emotionally collapse every time life becomes uncomfortable. Seneca understood this clearly when he wrote, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." That steadiness creates influence. Others begin listening more carefully because calm behavior communicates internal order. Inner order is rare in a world driven by impulse and emotional reaction. The person who can remain thoughtful instead of reactive naturally separates themselves from the noise around them. Over time, a deeper shift begins happening internally. The need to constantly monitor how others perceive you starts fading. Silence no longer feels threatening. Delayed responses no longer create panic. Disagreement no longer feels like rejection of your identity. A quiet confidence begins replacing emotional urgency because your sense of worth is no longer being negotiated in every interaction. That is the paradox most people miss. The less desperately you seek recognition, the more noticeable your presence becomes. Not because you are pretending not to care, but because emotional self-control creates gravity. People are naturally drawn toward those who are centered within themselves. Most people spend years trying to be appreciated before becoming necessary. They want recognition before developing substance, attention before discipline, and respect before proving reliability under pressure. Then they become frustrated when the world overlooks them. It feels personal at first. They assume they are being ignored because others are shallow, unfair, or lucky. But eventually, a harder truth begins revealing itself. Human beings naturally value what improves their lives, solves difficult problems, or brings stability into chaos. This is not cruelty. It is nature. Every system rewards usefulness in one form or another. Work rewards competence. Relationships reward steadiness. Leadership rewards clarity under pressure. Once this becomes clear, resentment starts losing its grip because the focus shifts away from blame and toward development. That shift changes everything internally. Instead of constantly asking why recognition is not arriving, attention begins moving toward capability. Skills become more important than image. Discipline becomes more important than appearances. Emotional control becomes more important than temporary approval. There is freedom in realizing your future is not entirely controlled by popularity or validation. A person who becomes deeply valuable eventually creates opportunities that insecure people spend years waiting for, not because the world suddenly becomes fair, but because competence naturally attracts trust and responsibility. People listen differently when your words consistently solve problems. They rely on you differently when your behavior remains calm under pressure. Even your presence changes because confidence built through preparation feels different from confidence built through performance. This is why some individuals appear grounded no matter what environment they enter. Their stability does not depend on praise, attention, or social approval. It comes from repeated proof. They have trained themselves to think clearly during stress, instead of collapsing emotionally the moment life becomes uncomfortable. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Stoicism placed enormous importance on this kind of inner training because external conditions are unpredictable by nature. Circumstances change constantly, opinions shift constantly, but a disciplined mind remains useful in every environment. The person who can stay thoughtful while everyone else panics already possesses an advantage most people will never fully understand. Calm thinking becomes a form of influence because most individuals lose perspective the moment pressure appears. They react impulsively, they search for escape, they look for someone emotionally stable enough to lead the situation. Quiet competence naturally fills that space. Many people underestimate how much emotional instability affects the way others perceive them. Intelligence alone does not create trust. Someone may speak beautifully about ambition, discipline, and values, but if their emotions constantly control their decisions, credibility weakens underneath the surface. People notice inconsistency quickly. One day, confidence appears strong. The next day, insecurity takes over completely. One moment, discipline exists. The next moment, impulses erase it. This unpredictability creates hesitation because human beings naturally seek stability. A person who remains composed and consistent over long periods creates psychological safety around themselves. Others begin associating them with order instead of confusion. That association quietly increases influence without needing to demand attention. There is also a deeper reason responsibility feels uncomfortable to so many people. Responsibility removes the illusion that life is simply happening to you. It forces confrontation with habits, priorities, and wasted potential. It asks difficult questions. If your presence disappeared tomorrow, what practical value would truly be missing? Complaints rarely leave impact. Emotional dependency rarely creates absence. Disciplined contribution does. The person who solves meaningful problems becomes difficult to replace because usefulness creates weight in every environment. This realization may feel harsh initially, but it becomes deeply empowering once fully accepted. It means growth remains possible regardless of personality, background, or past mistakes. A person can strengthen focus. They can build emotional discipline. They can develop rare abilities through patience and repetition. The moment responsibility is accepted, power quietly returns. That return of power changes daily life itself. Small frustrations stop dominating attention because energy becomes directed toward long-term development instead of constant emotional reaction. Time is treated differently. Conversations are treated differently. Even silence feels different because there is less urgency to prove worth through endless explanation. A focused person understands that value compounds slowly through repeated action, not dramatic displays. Over time, something subtle begins happening. The same people who once overlooked you start paying closer attention, not because you demanded recognition, but because your presence now carries substance. Real confidence emerges naturally when competence and self-control begin aligning. At that point, respect no longer feels chaste. It becomes a consequence. If these ideas resonate with you, consider subscribing and continuing this journey, not for noise or empty motivation, but for perspectives that strengthen the mind, sharpen awareness, and help you move through life with greater clarity, discipline, and self-command. This is why some individuals appear grounded no matter what environment they enter. Their stability does not depend on mood, praise, or social approval. It comes from repeated proof. They have trained themselves to think clearly during stress instead of collapsing emotionally the moment circumstances become uncomfortable. Stoic philosophy placed enormous importance on this kind of inner training because external situations are rarely predictable. Markets change, relationships change, public opinion changes constantly. But a disciplined mind remains useful in every environment. The person who can stay thoughtful while everyone else panics already possesses a rare advantage. Calm thinking becomes a form of influence because most people lose perspective the moment pressure appears. They react impulsively. They seek escape. They look for someone stable enough to guide the situation. Quiet competence naturally fills that space. Many people underestimate how much emotional instability affects the way others perceive them. They believe intelligence alone should create respect, yet intelligence without reliability often creates uncertainty instead. Someone may speak beautifully about goals, values, and ambition, but if their emotions constantly control their decisions, trust begins weakening underneath the surface. People notice inconsistency quickly. One day confidence appears strong, the next day insecurity takes over completely. One moment discipline exists, the next moment impulses erase it. This unpredictability makes others hesitant because human beings instinctively search for stability. A person who remains composed and consistent over long periods creates psychological safety around themselves. Others begin associating them with order instead of confusion. That association quietly increases their influence without needing to demand attention. There is also a deeper reason responsibility feels uncomfortable to so many people. Responsibility removes the illusion that life is entirely happening to you. It forces confrontation with habits, priorities, and wasted potential. It asks difficult questions. If your presence disappeared tomorrow, what practical value would truly be missing? Complaints rarely leave an impact. Emotional dependency rarely creates absence, but disciplined contribution does. The person who solves meaningful problems becomes difficult to replace because usefulness creates weight in every environment. This realization can feel harsh initially, yet it is deeply empowering once accepted fully. It means growth remains possible regardless of background, personality, or past mistakes. A person can learn emotional discipline. They can strengthen focus. They can develop rare abilities through repetition and patience. The moment responsibility is accepted, power quietly returns. That return of power changes the way daily life feels. Small frustrations stop dominating attention because energy becomes directed toward long-term development instead of constant emotional reaction. Time is treated differently. Conversations are treated differently. Even silence feels different because there is less urgency to prove worth through endless explanation. A focused person understands that value compounds slowly through repeated action, not dramatic displays. They become more selective with attention because attention itself becomes part of discipline. And over time, something subtle begins happening. The same people who once overlooked you start paying closer attention, not because you demanded recognition, but because your presence now carries substance. Real confidence emerges naturally when competence and self-control begin aligning. At that point, respect no longer feels chaste. It becomes a consequence. Most people never reach that stage because they remain trapped in comparison. They study other people's success obsessively while neglecting the habits required to build their own. Comparison creates emotional noise, and emotional noise weakens concentration. A disciplined person understands that attention is limited. Every hour spent seeking validation is an hour not spent sharpening the mind, improving a skill, strengthening the body, or learning patience under pressure. That is why self-mastery creates such a noticeable shift in presence. It removes unnecessary movement from the mind. Reactions become slower, choices become clearer, and confidence becomes quieter. Others may still misunderstand you at times, but misunderstanding stops feeling dangerous when your identity is built on substance instead of approval. At that point, your direction matters more than outside opinion, and progress becomes steady because your energy is finally moving toward construction instead of constant emotional defense and fear. This is difficult for many people to accept because they confuse availability with kindness. They believe always being reachable proves loyalty, emotional depth, or sincerity. In reality, constant accessibility often communicates something else entirely. It suggests fear of disconnection, fear of silence, fear of being forgotten the moment attention disappears. Epictetus warned about this kind of dependence when he said, "If you seek tranquility, do less." Human beings are sensitive to emotional signals even when nobody says them out loud. A person who constantly reaches outward for reassurance eventually reveals internal instability through small behaviors. The rushed response, the inability to pause, the discomfort with distance, these things appear subtle, but they shape perception in powerful ways. People begin sensing emotional dependency even if they cannot explain exactly why. And emotional dependency weakens presence because it creates the impression that your emotional state is constantly waiting to be validated by someone else. The Stoics understood the importance of restraint because restraint strengthens self-command. The ability to pause before reacting creates space between emotion and behavior. That space changes everything. Most people move impulsively through life without ever developing that separation. They feel anxiety and immediately reach for distraction. They feel uncertainty and immediately seek reassurance. They feel silence and instantly try to fill it with words, messages, explanations, or noise. But the person who can remain composed during silence develops a completely different relationship with themselves. Silence stops feeling threatening. Distance stops feeling personal. Waiting stops feeling unbearable. And through that discipline, something powerful begins forming internally. Emotional independence. That independence changes the energy surrounding a person. They stop chasing interactions out of fear. They stop forcing conversations to avoid stillness. Their attention becomes more intentional because they are no longer using people as a way to escape their own thoughts. This creates a kind of calm confidence that others immediately notice, not because it is loud or performative, but because it feels rare. Most people are constantly reacting to something: notifications, opinions, emotional impulses, social pressure. The individual who remains centered within themselves naturally stands apart because their behavior is no longer controlled by urgency. They can pause, they can think, they can choose instead of simply reacting. And that ability creates psychological weight in every interaction. There is a reason the most memorable people are rarely the ones constantly demanding attention. Their restraint creates curiosity. Their silence creates presence. They do not feel the need to narrate every thought or emotionally perform for approval. Instead, they observe carefully, speak deliberately, and invest their energy selectively. That selectiveness increases the value of their attention because it no longer feels automatic or endlessly available. Human beings naturally appreciate what feels intentional. When someone gives their full attention calmly and sincerely without desperation attached to it, the interaction feels more meaningful. The opposite is also true. Constant emotional availability often becomes invisible over time because people subconsciously stop valuing what appears unlimited. Over time, another subtle shift begins taking place. You stop feeling the need to immediately respond to every emotional impulse. A delayed reply no longer creates guilt. Silence no longer feels like rejection. Being alone no longer feels like evidence that something is wrong with you. Instead of panicking during moments of distance, you begin appreciating them because solitude becomes a place of clarity rather than discomfort. Carl Jung captured this perfectly when he said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." Most people avoid silence because silence forces confrontation with unresolved emotions and restless thoughts. Constant stimulation protects them from self-reflection. But the person willing to sit quietly with themselves develops unusual mental strength. They become less reactive because they are no longer running from their own mind. That is where internal authority begins forming, not through domination, status, or performance, but through self-possession. A calm person who does not desperately seek external stimulation carries a completely different presence into the world. Others stop sensing neediness and begin sensing standards instead. The energy shifts quietly. People become more respectful with your time because you respect it first. They become more attentive to your words because you no longer speak impulsively or excessively. Even your silence begins carrying meaning because it no longer comes from insecurity. It comes from control. And in a world addicted to noise, urgency, and constant emotional exposure, that kind of composed restraint becomes impossible to ignore over time naturally. The Stoics warned constantly about the danger of unconscious emotion because uncontrolled reactions make human beings predictable. Predictable people are easy to influence, easy to provoke, easy to destabilize. Once someone understands what triggers your anger, insecurity, jealousy, or fear, they gain access to your inner world. At that point, your emotions stop belonging entirely to you because external behavior begins controlling internal stability. This is why emotional control carries such quiet power. A person who cannot easily be provoked becomes difficult to manipulate. They do not hand emotional authority to every opinion, insult, or uncomfortable situation that appears around them. Instead, they pause, they observe, they respond deliberately rather than impulsively. That small difference changes the entire energy of a person's presence because calmness naturally communicates strength. There is something deeply noticeable about the individual who remains composed while everyone else loses control. In tense situations, people instinctively look toward the calmest person in the room because emotional steadiness creates a sense of direction. Panic spreads quickly, but so does composure. The person who remains grounded during pressure influences the emotional atmosphere around them without needing to dominate it. This influence rarely comes from loudness or aggression. In fact, aggressive reactions often reveal internal instability more than strength. Anyone can raise their voice when emotions take over. Anyone can react impulsively when anger appears. The more difficult skill is remaining centered when circumstances pressure you to abandon control. That restraint creates respect because it demonstrates mastery over the self rather than surrender to temporary emotion. Most people do not realize how much of their suffering comes not from events themselves, but from the inability to regulate their reactions to those events. Rejection becomes unbearable because identity is attached to acceptance. Criticism becomes devastating because self-worth depends on approval. Uncertainty creates panic because the mind has never learned how to remain stable without guarantees. Emotional discipline interrupts this cycle. It teaches the mind that discomfort does not require immediate reaction. A difficult feeling can exist without controlling behavior. An insult can appear without destroying peace. A moment of rejection can happen without collapsing self-respect. This does not happen automatically. It requires practice, patience, and repeated awareness of internal patterns that most people spend their lives avoiding. This creates a form of freedom many people never experience. Most individuals believe freedom means acting on every feeling the moment it appears. In reality, that often leads to dependence rather than freedom, because impulses begin controlling decisions. True freedom begins when emotions no longer dictate every action automatically. The ability to remain calm during uncertainty creates options. The ability to pause before reacting creates perspective. And perspective changes outcomes because clear thinking becomes possible again. A reactive mind sees threats everywhere. A disciplined mind sees choices. That difference quietly transforms relationships, work, communication, and self-perception over time. There is also a deeper confidence that develops through emotional control. Not surface confidence built on praise or temporary success, but stable confidence rooted in self-trust. When you repeatedly prove to yourself that emotions no longer dominate your decisions, fear begins losing authority over your mind. You stop feeling emotionally helpless in difficult situations because you know discomfort itself cannot control you anymore. This creates unusual steadiness in environments where most people become reactive. Others notice it immediately, even if they cannot fully explain why. Calm individuals create a sense of psychological safety because their behavior remains measured instead of chaotic. Their words carry more weight because they are not constantly speaking from emotional turbulence. Over time, the need to defend your ego starts weakening as well. Not every disagreement feels threatening anymore. Not every criticism demands emotional retaliation. Silence becomes easier, patience becomes stronger, and perhaps most importantly, other people lose the ability to easily disturb your inner peace. That is where emotional discipline becomes transformative, not because it removes emotion, but because it removes emotional slavery. The outside world continues changing constantly. Opinions still shift, difficult situations still appear, but your internal state stops collapsing every time life becomes uncomfortable. And once that stability begins forming consistently, something powerful happens quietly beneath the surface. You stop reacting to life impulsively and start responding to it consciously, with clarity, patience, strength, wisdom, and control each day. Once emotional discipline begins strengthening, fear slowly starts losing its grip on the mind. Not all at once, quietly, gradually. The things that once created panic begin feeling smaller because your sense of stability no longer depends entirely on external outcomes. This changes the way you move through life. Rejection stops feeling like destruction. Distance stops feeling like abandonment. Uncertainty stops feeling unbearable. And the reason is simple. The mind begins realizing it can survive discomfort without collapsing emotionally. Most people spend years trying to control situations, relationships, and opinions because they believe control will protect them from pain. But beneath that behavior is usually fear. Fear of losing connection, fear of being unwanted, fear of ending up alone with themselves. That fear quietly shapes decisions every single day, often without being recognized for what it truly is. This is why emotional independence changes a person so deeply. It restores the ability to choose instead of cling. The moment you genuinely accept that you can walk away from what damages your peace, your entire presence begins changing. Conversations feel different because fear is no longer controlling every word. Boundaries become clearer because approval is no longer worth self-abandonment. Even silence changes because you stop rushing to repair every moment of discomfort immediately. There is a certain calmness that appears when someone no longer feels emotionally trapped by outcomes. Others notice it instinctively. The energy feels grounded instead of desperate, measured instead of anxious, and that emotional steadiness quietly increases respect because people naturally trust those who appear capable of standing on their own emotionally. Many individuals confuse attachment with love because they have spent most of their lives connecting emotional dependence with emotional depth. But dependence and connection are not the same thing. One comes from appreciation, the other comes from fear. A person who fears losing someone often begins sacrificing honesty, dignity, and emotional balance in order to preserve the relationship. They tolerate behavior that slowly weakens them internally because they believe losing the connection would hurt more than losing themselves. Yet the opposite is usually true. Losing yourself damages every part of life because your confidence, clarity, and self-respect begin eroding quietly beneath the surface. The Stoics believed peace requires alignment between actions and values. The moment a person repeatedly betrays their own standards to avoid rejection, inner conflict begins growing stronger. That conflict often appears in subtle ways first: restlessness, anxiety, emotional exhaustion, overthinking every interaction, constantly monitoring another person's mood for signs of distance or disapproval, These patterns slowly consume mental energy because the mind becomes trapped in survival mode, always searching for reassurance that may never fully arrive. Emotional attachment without self-possession creates instability because your emotional state becomes dependent on factors outside your control. One delayed message changes your mood. One disagreement ruins your peace. One moment of uncertainty creates panic. Over time, this emotional dependence weakens both relationships and identity because fear quietly replaces authenticity. The shift begins when you stop negotiating your dignity for temporary emotional comfort. That does not mean becoming cold, detached, or emotionally unavailable. It means understanding that peace has value too. Self-respect has value too. And anything that constantly forces you to betray those things eventually becomes too expensive emotionally, no matter how attached you feel to it. This realization creates a different kind of confidence, not arrogance, not emotional distance, just clarity. The clarity to recognize when something aligns with your values and when it slowly destroys them. Once that awareness strengthens, decisions become simpler because fear no longer controls them as intensely. There is also something deeply powerful about becoming comfortable with uncertainty. Most people remain trapped because uncertainty feels unbearable to them. They would rather stay in familiar unhappiness than face the discomfort of change. But growth rarely happens inside emotional dependence. It happens the moment a person accepts that discomfort is survivable. Seneca understood this well when he wrote, "He who fears death will never do anything worthy of a living man." The willingness to lose what no longer serves your peace creates freedom, because now your choices are no longer entirely controlled by fear. You stop chasing reassurance constantly because your emotional survival no longer depends on someone else's behavior. That independence changes posture, tone, eye contact, and even silence. Others begin sensing standards where they once sensed insecurity. A person's reputation begins forming long before they realize it. Every interaction leaves an impression. Every repeated behavior creates a pattern. And over time, those patterns become the lens through which people interpret your character. Most individuals think reputation is built through image, charm, or carefully chosen words, but reputation is far more practical than that. It is accumulated behavior remembered by others. The way you handle pressure, the way you respond to discomfort, the way you speak when frustrated, disappointed, or uncertain. People observe these things constantly, even when they say nothing about them. And eventually, those observations harden into conclusions that follow you quietly into every room you enter. That is why inconsistency damages influence so quickly. Someone may speak confidently about discipline, values, and self-control, but repeated emotional collapse eventually weakens every word they say. Human beings trust patterns more than promises. One impressive moment may attract temporary attention, but consistency creates long-term respect. The Stoics understood this deeply because they viewed character as something revealed through repetition rather than performance. Anyone can appear strong for a day. Anyone can sound wise during moments of comfort. The real test appears when pressure enters the situation. Stress exposes habits. Difficulty exposes emotional discipline, and over time, people begin recognizing whether your behavior remains steady or collapses depending on circumstances. This is why reliable individuals carry a certain kind of quiet authority, even without status or recognition. Their presence feels stable because their actions rarely contradict their words. They do not need to constantly remind people who they are, because their behavior already communicates it consistently. There is something deeply reassuring about someone whose emotional state does not shift wildly every time life becomes uncomfortable. Others begin trusting them naturally because predictability creates psychological safety. In a world filled with emotional impulsiveness, calm consistency becomes rare, and rare qualities always gain value with time. Most people damage their own reputation slowly without realizing it, not through dramatic failure, but through small repeated contradictions. They promise discipline and then abandon it when emotions become inconvenient. They speak about loyalty while behaving inconsistently under pressure. They seek respect while repeatedly sacrificing self-control for temporary emotional relief. Over time, these contradictions weaken credibility because people stop believing what is said and begin focusing entirely on what is repeated. This happens in every area of life: relationships, work, friendships, leadership. The mind naturally searches for patterns because patterns create trust. Without trust, influence becomes fragile, no matter how impressive someone appears on the surface. The modern world encourages performance more than consistency. Many people spend enormous energy trying to appear disciplined instead of becoming disciplined quietly over time. They chase attention through dramatic declarations, emotional reactions, and visible displays of motivation. But intensity fades quickly when it is not supported by internal structure. Real discipline is often less visible than people expect. It appears in repeated actions performed calmly without constant recognition. Waking up when motivation disappears, remaining respectful during frustration, keeping composure during uncertainty, following through when nobody is watching. These behaviors may seem small individually, but over months and years they shape reputation more powerfully than occasional moments of brilliance ever could. This is why controlled individuals often appear powerful, even without trying to appear powerful. Their restraint creates credibility, their patience creates confidence, their consistency removes the need for constant self-promotion because people already know what to expect from them. There is no confusion surrounding their character. They do not shift personalities depending on the environment or the audience. Over time, this creates a reputation that begins opening opportunities before conversations even begin. People recommend those they trust emotionally. They rely on those who remain stable under pressure. Reliability itself becomes valuable because so few people maintain it consistently anymore. Meanwhile, insecurity reveals itself quickly through inconsistency. A person who constantly seeks validation often changes behavior depending on who is watching. They exaggerate, they overpromise, they react emotionally when approval disappears. These patterns weaken perception faster than failure itself because they communicate internal instability. Failure can earn respect when handled with composure, but insecurity slowly erodes trust because it creates uncertainty about who someone truly is beneath their performance. That uncertainty affects every interaction quietly. People become hesitant. Distance increases. Respect weakens gradually beneath the surface. The truth is much simpler than most people want to believe. Reputation is not built through what you claim about yourself. It is built through what your repeated behavior forces people to conclude over time. If your actions consistently communicate calmness, integrity, and discipline, people eventually trust those qualities without needing explanation. But if your behavior repeatedly contradicts your words, no amount of image management can repair the damage permanently. The Stoics understood that self-mastery always becomes visible eventually because patterns reveal character with time. A person may temporarily manipulate perception, but repetition exposes reality. That is why disciplined individuals focus less on controlling opinions and more on controlling behavior. They understand that influence earned through consistency lasts longer than attention gained through emotional performance. And once that understanding becomes deeply internalized, life itself becomes more stable because your identity stops depending on appearance and starts depending on actions repeated with patience, clarity, restraint, and quiet integrity every single day consistently. Eventually, after enough disappointment, enough emotional exhaustion, and enough time spent trying to earn validation from people who were never capable of giving it consistently, a deeper realization begins forming quietly in the mind. The struggle was never entirely about other people. It was not only about rejection, disrespect, misunderstanding, or unfair treatment. Beneath all of those experiences was something more personal, the inability to remain stable when external conditions became uncomfortable. The inability to separate self-worth from approval, the habit of abandoning inner peace in exchange for temporary acceptance. Most people spend years believing the world itself is the source of their suffering, while rarely examining how much power they continue handing to it emotionally every single day. The Stoics understood that peace and strength are deeply connected. Not the aggressive kind of strength obsessed with domination or superiority, but the calmer kind rooted in self-possession, the kind that remains steady during uncertainty instead of collapsing emotionally the moment life becomes uncomfortable. Most people misunderstand power because they associate it with status, influence, or control over others. But external control is fragile when internal control is absent. A person may appear successful publicly while remaining emotionally controlled by praise, attention, fear, insecurity, or the opinions of strangers. That is not freedom. Real strength begins when emotional reactions stop governing decisions completely. The person who can maintain clarity during pressure already possesses something many people spend their entire lives searching for without realizing it. This changes the way you move through the world. You stop shrinking yourself to fit environments that require self-betrayal in exchange for acceptance. You stop overextending your energy trying to convince people to value what they were never willing to understand. Instead of chasing visibility constantly, your attention shifts toward building substance quietly. Discipline, patience, self-respect, emotional balance. These things create a foundation that external instability cannot easily destroy. And over time, others begin noticing the difference, even if you never announce it directly. Calmness changes posture, clarity changes communication. Self-respect changes the way people respond to your boundaries because your behavior teaches them what treatment you will and will not tolerate. Most people never realize how often the world tests emotional stability. Every inconvenience becomes an opportunity to lose composure. Every disagreement becomes an invitation toward impulsive reaction. Every disappointment quietly asks whether your peace depends entirely on external outcomes. These tests happen constantly in small, unnoticed moments. A delayed response, a dismissive comment, a moment of uncertainty, a situation that does not unfold according to expectation. The mind reveals itself through these reactions because reactions expose attachment. They expose fear. They expose emotional dependency. And over time, those patterns teach other people exactly how much control they have over your inner state. This is why self-governance matters so deeply. The person who governs their own mind becomes difficult to manipulate because emotional triggers stop controlling behavior automatically. Insults lose power when identity is stable internally. Pressure loses power when calmness has been practiced repeatedly. Fear loses power when discomfort no longer feels unbearable. This does not mean becoming emotionless or detached from humanity. It means emotions stop functioning as chains pulling your attention and decisions in every direction. There is a major difference between feeling emotions and becoming ruled by them. Most people never learn that distinction because society constantly rewards emotional impulsiveness while rarely teaching emotional discipline. Over time, this internal shift creates an entirely different relationship with life itself. You stop needing constant reassurance because your peace no longer depends entirely on outcomes you cannot control. You stop viewing uncertainty as immediate danger because your stability now comes from within rather than from external guarantees. This creates resilience, not loud resilience designed to impress others, but quiet resilience that allows you to remain grounded during difficult seasons without emotionally collapsing. And that steadiness changes perception. Others begin treating you differently because your reactions no longer communicate insecurity or desperation. Calmness naturally commands more respect than emotional volatility ever will. There is also freedom in realizing that not every situation deserves emotional investment. Many people waste years trying to change minds that were never open, chase approval from people incapable of giving it sincerely, or remain emotionally attached to environments that constantly diminish their peace. But once self-respect strengthens internally, clarity begins replacing emotional confusion. You start recognizing where your energy creates growth and where it only creates exhaustion. That awareness changes choices naturally. Standards become clearer, boundaries become stronger, and because of that, emotional life becomes less chaotic. The truth is simple, even if many people spend years resisting it. The external world will always remain unpredictable. Opinions will shift. Rejection will happen. Difficult moments will continue appearing without warning. But your relationship with those experiences changes completely once you stop surrendering your value to them emotionally. The Stoics understood that inner stability creates a form of freedom external circumstances cannot easily destroy. And the moment that understanding becomes real instead of theoretical, life itself begins feeling different, lighter, clearer, more intentional. Because your emotional state is no longer controlled entirely by the behavior of others. At that point, the world may still test your patience, discipline, and self-respect constantly, but it stops owning them. And that is where real peace quietly begins to take root within the mind permanently over time through conscious living, restraint, wisdom, patience, and emotional self-command every day. The moment you stop chasing validation, stop reacting to every opinion, and stop surrendering your peace to the outside world, something powerful begins to happen quietly within you. Your mind becomes clearer, your presence becomes stronger, and the world starts responding differently because you are no longer moving through life from desperation, but from self-respect. Real power was never about controlling other people. It was about finally gaining control over yourself. Thank you for being part of Stoic Journal. If this message resonated with you, take a moment and watch one of the videos on your screen right now. Continue strengthening your mind, deepening your discipline, and building the kind of inner stability that cannot easily be shaken.